Today, Rick and I want to talk about this idea of really finding rest in your life, finding enjoyment in your life. And while I think having high standards and being driven and motivated, as we've covered in the past, can be a good thing, one of the things that we've talked about recently is just how it can also drive you to be in this place of constant stress and anxiety, and not really just enjoying the relationship and the fellowship with God. So thanks for joining us today. This is Michael and Rick here with the Endure Training Center. Our goal is to help you find and fulfill your purpose by developing a Christ-centered approach to faith, fellowship, and fortitude. So Rick, man, it's good to be back on here with you. It's been a couple months. You've been a busy man, growing out your hair and your goatee, I see there. So thanks for taking the time on this Saturday morning to have this conversation.
Yeah, man. Talking about low standards. Hey, low standards when it comes to this thing. I don't know that I would call this a beard or a goatee. I've told people this is facial hair. It has to be, it has to be more than this, but yeah.
It looks kind of like you're homeless.
Yeah. I tell you, you know what? Somebody asked me, they said, "What's going on with that?" I said, "Man, I'm just lazy." Like, what's going on? I'm just lazy. I don't want to shave, and it feels good to finally give up. It kind of fits in with our topic today, don't it?
It does. Yeah. So my little girl, she has a penchant for not wanting to comb her hair. And so sometimes we'll tell her, I'm like, "You look like you're homeless." And then she'll say, "Well, I have a home." I'm like, "Well, we know you have a home." And I say, "You look like you're homeless. Go comb your hair."
So she's just resting, man. She's resting in her beauty.
That's right.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about rest, man. I always immediately go to physical rest, right? But there's a spiritual element to it too. So I think we may get into both of those. But we know from scientific data that it's important for us to get physical rest, right? So I was looking at some stuff and talking about it's vital to good health. Most people will tell you a lack of rest is connected with a shortened lifespan even. And, a lot of people today are dealing with sleep apnea and things of that sort. And they're showing that if you don't get good rest and good oxygen return, then you're not going to get a good reproductive aspect to your cells and other things. I was telling Chris the other day, he was talking a little bit about rest, and talking about how sheep grow their wool when they're resting. And I said, well, that's the problem with this beard. I'm not getting enough rest, bro. If it grows when you rest, obviously I'm not laying down enough. So
remember, it's not a beard, it's facial hair.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Your facial hair actually looks about as probably legit as mine when I grow it in, which is not, it's not very full. So I'd expect more from you being silver haired and everything, but you still got a few years to mature and fill out that beard.
Yeah. But so, it's interesting too, those when you talk about rest is just a product of order and rhythm, right? So if you think about it, God's creation has an order and a rhythm to it that requires rest. So like a day is divided into to darkness and light, right? So there's a and I believe God gave us you ever been in Alaska in the summer when it's light almost 24 hours?
Yeah.
We went on a mission trip one time. We literally had to set an alarm and go, okay, at this time everybody will stop, and we all, because we were gonna crash, man.
Keep working.
Yeah, it wasn't having, seeing like days are split, weeks are divided into days, months are divided into weeks, and then years are divided into months. And then, of course, we have seasons. So all of it has a natural rhythm to it. God's creation does. And that's why God gave us and commanded us to have a Sabbath. He says, look, even him in Genesis, 6 days he worked. And then he said on the seventh day he rested, not because God was exhausted. Obviously, God never tires. He never slumbers nor sleeps, the Bible says. But he was finished, and he rested in the sense he enjoyed his work. And I think sometimes we find it very difficult to stop and enjoy our work. And we just, we get done with one thing, we're like constantly, if you're like me, you get done with a project at home, and I'm like, all right, got to start working on the next project. Here we go.
Yeah.
I can't even sit and enjoy what I have.
Yeah. Yeah, from a physical rest standpoint, that I mean, me personally, that's one area that I really struggle with. I typically sleep. My goal, so I started in my journal keeping track on just kind of like mini daily goals, looking at a month. Maybe I'll talk about it more in depth at a different time. But there's four things that I wanted to measure each day: is how many hours do I work, how many hours do I sleep, did I put time in towards memorizing scripture, and then did I work out, with the caveat that reading the word, I was like, well, that's a daily thing, so I don't need to fill that block. But so
Mm-hmm.
my goal was 6 hours, and looking back on April, with the exception of my time and on vacation, I'm like, man, I'm routinely in the slightly sub five, or right in the 5.5 hours of sleep. And it's tough. And that's probably, from a physical rest standpoint, one of my biggest struggles right now. And part of that is trying to get up, make time, quality time and quantity time to spend in the word, usually trying to get a workout in. The job right now has been definitely more demanding, and then put on top of that 2 hours of commuting every day, and then coming home, trying to coach, trying to make time for the kids, for the wife. So that's definitely a constant struggle of mine. And I think, to the point that you made earlier, one thing I realize is, even if eventually I'm done commuting, I don't think you're going to generally work less, at a minimum, less than an 8 hour day. So 40 hours a week. I don't know, maybe you could, but like, I recognize that I still would probably find something to fill my time.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is in that regard, how to prioritize sleep, other than, I guess, if I'm getting up at right now 4 a.m., going to bed at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Um, yeah. So that's just a challenge of mine. One of them, one of the many.
It's interesting because I used to worry about like sleep time, right? So for
Hmm.
me, perfect rhythm is 7 hours, I think, for me. Um, I can't sustain like I used to. Used to I could do less than six, right around six. I can't do that anymore. As you get older, you'll find out. And I say that from this sense, like I just find myself not able to concentrate, or I
Yeah.
get irritable, right? And then now, and I progressively irritable earlier, right? So it's like
Hmm.
I can sustain to 8 o'clock without getting short with people, and then I go, okay, it's close.
8 a.m.
Yeah, yeah, no. But I'm like, okay, it's like Cinderella. Hey, it's getting close to 8 o'clock. I need to like get away from everybody and go home. But I don't I find that my body will start to tell me, hey man, you got to shut it down. And I don't know. I struggle a little bit with like, hey, I go to bed too early. I wake up too early. But you'll just naturally find this. I think you'll find a sweet spot in there. Interesting. You talk about you know recording all that. They got these new things now called the Whoop. You heard of the Whoop?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this little thing, and it tells you, hey, you recharged 90% today. And
Hmm.
my son-in-law and my daughter use them quite often, and it's interesting. I don't use one, but it's kind of interesting how it takes these variables and tells you how much you've recharged or hasn't, because subconsciously you think you're fine, but I think when analytically you could probably show, hey, I could probably do a better job with that.
Yeah.
But it's tough because you got to balance a lot of things, and we've talked about balance on here a lot over the years, over
Yeah.
several months. But what are you going to give preeminence to in this?
Yeah.
Well, but yeah, so it's something that you got to battle with, and you have to adapt as you go.
Yeah. So along those lines, then, I was reading, in, let's see, it was Matthew 11, and maybe this is, we can kind of take a look then from a spiritual component as well. Matthew 11, I was reading the other day, and Jesus is just talking about, let's see, Matthew 11, and starting in verse 25, but he's talking about giving rest, coming to him. Starting in verse 28, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And then verse 29, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly of heart, and you will find rest in your souls. And then verse 30, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So that verse 30, I think I've heard that and familiar with that. And the part that stuck out to me is where it says, for I am gentle and lowly of heart. And that's one that I'm just still meditating on a little bit. But sometimes I need to stop and think about Jesus and his life. And as you read, especially through the Gospels, sometimes I'm like, what kind of guy was he truly? Like, was he an intense dude? Was he pretty laid back? Was he super mellow? I mean, obviously in the Gospels, we see him getting really fired up, primarily towards those who are self-righteous. But then I think about and meditate on, who does Jesus spend his time with? The
Mm-hmm.
social outcasts, the sinners, the prostitutes, the tax collectors. Like, I was just reading, and I think it was Luke 5 yesterday, where he called his first disciples, fishermen. I think we've talked about this on here one time, but I heard a guy, he was preaching a sermon, but he goes, how Peter was a redneck? I was like, oh, this is going to be good. He was fishing in the middle of the night with his shirt off.
Yeah, yeah. No,
I don't remember if we talked about that before, but every time when I heard that, I always think of you. I imagine you fishing at midnight with your shirt off in the middle of the summer.
with my
Hey,
Ranger pants on, no shoes, Ranger pants, and no shirt, man. That's
yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up, and I know it's funny with these talks because we go all over the place to some degree, but you do realize, like, okay, so all young men in that day and time, they wanted to be a disciple. So a disciple was a follower of a rabbi. So each rabbi would choose a disciple. And if you didn't make the cut, like all young men now, they want to be baseball players or football players.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, they wanted to be, excuse me, disciples. So so Peter and Andrew and all these dudes that had gone out to be fishing, they had got passed over. There was a rabbi
Mm.
that evaluated him and said, "Ah, man, I got somebody else. You didn't make the cut. You got to go now and be part of the family ministry." Because we think, man, their dad didn't have a problem with them dropping the nets and leaving. No, because every
Hmm.
dad wanted his son to be a disciple, right? So here comes the rabbi, Jesus. They've been rejected by a rabbi. The rabbi comes and says, "Hey, come follow me." Dude, they were stoked. They were like, "Man, I got passed up and I'm nobody. I got to go out here and fish, man." And boom, they got picked up. And obviously that goes back, man. We're going to go all over the place here. But, God don't call the equipped. He equips the called. A long
Yeah.
time ago, you did a talk on it. That's Peter, man, and Andrew and all these dudes. So, and to flip it back to what we're talking about today, they didn't have the anxiety of living up to his standard. They didn't have the anxiety of trying to make the grade because he's like, look, my burden's light. You ain't gotta make the grade. I'm gonna establish you. I'm gonna breathe these. Trust in me. Walk with me and let the power that I have abide in you, and you'll do great things. So while other rabbi or disciples following these, they always had to live up to, hey, my shoes got to be polished, whatever,
Yeah. The law.
whatever little standards their disciple or their rabbi had. Jesus is like, no, man, you just need to come and follow me and be like me. So when you talk about him being gentle and lowly of heart, that's what it was about. And then talk about Jesus being how was he laid back? Here's what I like to tell people like this. I think he was a cool dude, man. And but I think he intentionally used emotions for a purpose, unlike
Hmm.
we just let our emotions go uncontrolled.
Yeah.
And I use the old analogy of like a leader I knew one time never lost his cool. One day he's in a staff meeting, man, he just goes off. But he had planned it. He had planned every word he was going to say, and it was out of character, really. And I was like, "Hey, sir, what's going on? Like, what was that?" He goes, "That's what needed to be done. It's not my character, but that needed that." But it's just a couple thoughts in that area.
Yeah. No, that's good. and like I said, just the idea of being gentle, gentle and lowly in heart. Um, I think that's just where I'm trying to learn from in terms of, what is that then right approach, not just to life, but from a spiritual standpoint, from a life, work standpoint. And so one of the things we had talked about, before we started this, was the idea of these high standards versus low standards. And one of the things that I've been kicking around for a little while now is like, is there value in having low standards, or lower standards, or you could call them low, realistic expectations? But I know for me personally, oftentimes I'm a victim. I'm beginning to believe of just these high expectations and maybe too idealistic. Right? You have this idea that whatever it may be, church should be this way, a pastor should be this way, officer should be this way, coach should be this way, a program should be run this way, and rarely do these things or people meet up to them. And so I think that leaves room for being frustrated or being disappointed, or all of the above. And as I've thought about it over the last, I don't know, a couple of weeks or month now, I think one of the dangers of having these high unrealistic standards is that it can also drive us to become prideful, or maybe not sympathetic, or just looking down on people if they don't measure up. And so over the last little while now, I've really worked on being more realistic, in my expectations, to include in my own life, because that's a conversation that my wife has with me often. Is it's like, basically, it's like, hey man, you just need to chill out a little bit. Like, everything doesn't have to be perfect. And
Mm.
I think it's that mindset, again, to include even from a spiritual standpoint sometimes, which can drive this being in a place of unrest and unable to really just enjoy and appreciate life.
Yeah. The problem, or here's what okay, so I'm 57 years old almost, right? And, obviously I have a different perspective on life. As you grow older, your perspectives change. And so, but and this is true, man. Man, we need to stop worrying about the results and think about the process.
Mm,
Let me give you a few examples. People say, well, man, I want to make E7 right in the military. I want to at least make E7 and retire. Okay, that's not a bad goal or objective, but what if things don't line up and circumstances don't? Or, some people say, I just want to make chief, and you get so consumed in the results that you would violate your own character to get there if you're not careful.
hmm
Versus like, hey man, I want to get up every day and I want to be a great example of Christ, and I want to do my very best at whatever it is they've given me, right? So, I, and I don't know what it was about me. I had great mentors. But the bottom line is, I never like sought a job or wanted, any particular.
hmm
One thing, I probably just wasn't smart enough to know how to go about it. I didn't.
hmm
So I just said, you know what, man, tell me what you want me to do, and I'll go do my best at it. And if I'm good at it, let's do it again. If I ain't, move to something else, right? So it works out, right? And we've said this many different times, me and in conversations. Many people that I work with were better NCOs than me and better leaders than me, but they didn't obtain the rank I obtained.
hmm
And it's not because that's life. And that's where in Ecclesiastes, Solomon, the wisest man that ever lived, he said, vanity of vanities,
hmm
emptiness, emptiness. Like, man, all this stuff, what does it really mean in the end? It don't mean nothing. All of us is gonna die with the same stuff. Nothing, right?
hmm
Another analogy. I always say, I play golf, and I've tried to get better at it and all this stuff. Do I put in enough effort to get better? Probably not. I always tell people, I said, don't get mad if you go out there and golf. Don't get mad getting golf because you don't practice.
hmm
How you get mad? You don't practice
Yeah.
enough to get mad. But my point is this. I played the other day, and I've been shooting in the mid 80s, right? And all of a sudden I shot like a 92 or whatever, right? So I'm like, man, what in the world, man? I just, and then I stopped to think. I said, dude, I had two bad holes. That's
Hmm.
what messed up my score. I drove the ball good. I was putting a little better. Like, don't lose sight of the good pieces and the good. And I had a good time, and I got to have a great conversation with a guy to hopefully I'll get him back in church.
Hmm.
It's just, man, we get so caught up in a standard in this piece, and I guess the cliche today, or I don't think it's cliche. Enjoy the process, right? You hear
Yeah.
it all the time. The process, man. If you're gonna do something, you got to enjoy the process. If you don't know and enjoy the process, man, don't do it. Because once you achieve the objective, you're just gonna be like, whatever, it ain't worth it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I went off on a tangent, man.
No, that's good, and I think that's really funny. You said that, enjoy the process, and it's not about the result, because that that's exactly what I preach from a coaching standpoint, both in soccer and wrestling, and especially with these, primarily with youth, little elementary school kids, and some in middle school now. But that's what I try to emphasize with them. I was like, if you, and I have some of this I pick up from, Cal Sanderson and some of the little things you hear coming out of there, but that's what he talks about. He says attitude and effort is more important than results, because you can't always control the results.
That's right.
You might be a really good athlete, a great wrestler, but man, someone's always better. Or you just have a bad day. But if you focus on, was my attitude right? Did I put in the right level of effort? Well, then you can walk away regardless of the results, and take something away from that. And so when you made that comment, it kind of, the little light bulb for me went off. Is like, okay, well, that, to your point, that mindset needs to be applied to life, not just sports, life, and the process of life. And so, one example for me is, so I think it was last fall when I was coaching soccer, my younger son in soccer. I had these very high expectations for one of the games because we were playing well, and man, the wheels just came off the bus. And I can't remember if we've talked about this, or I talked about this on here, but it ended up being a disaster all around. Like, it was a really good team. They were a year and a half older than us. And they just looked bigger, faster, stronger, better. And they just crushed us. And my parents were in town visiting for that game, and my one of my coaches forgot that the time changed, so it was just me on the sideline, and I felt like it was chaos. And I was getting in an argument with one of the kids on the team because I was trying to, correct him, and he was arguing with me. And it's like, dude, I just blew up. And after, I left my son in goal, and he got like 10 goals scored on him in one half. And so he's just devastated, and so then at the end, man, I'm just still fuming, just so mad at myself, mad at just everything. Like the kids, I'm like, man, they're not playing good. And so my son was all upset. And, so instead of me, telling them, hey man, good job, like, way to hang in there and goal and keep your head up, I was just mad, like mad. And my wife got really upset with me, and that drove a very uncomfortable conversation over the next couple days. But I had to do a lot of reflection on that, and one of them is like, well, dude, why, it's like a soccer game, like, why the heck are you getting so mad about that? And I think there was just some deeper, heart level issues that I needed to work through. So long story to say, the example now, I think this season, now we've only played 2 games, but I tell my wife, I'm like, all right, I have to reset my expectations every game. So we played really well last week. We've practiced really well, but I need to go in and reset my expectations, and really just if I said, okay, if we play well as a team and our kids have good attitudes and they have fun, like, that's success to me. If we get clobbered by a team we could have beat or should have beat, then okay. And, there's always room for frustration, but I think that's just an example of how I'm trying to reset my expectations and focus on, like you said, kind of the process. Like, what's truly important to me coaching these young kids. And I think that's a big one, is being, I preach, be a selfless teammate, have a coachable attitude, and be a disciplined competitor, like trying to teach them to learn how to compete. And eventually I would like to figure out how to, weave in there competing for a purpose,
Mm.
greater than yourself. But yeah, just that idea of not getting so caught up in the results, but looking at, and then more importantly, enjoying the process and enjoying the journey.
Yeah, especially you start talking about competitive sports, right? Okay, so sometimes the other person's just better than you,
Mm-hmm.
right? I never
Yep.
forget the time. I mean, I was running really well. And the fastest time I've ever had on a 1.5 mile run was 7:58, which was
Ooh,
time, right? And I was pissed, man. You know why? I got beat. I got beat. And the dude wasn't even a runner. He was a soccer player.
really?
The guy's first name was Tyson. I still remember his
Oh,
last name. And I'm like, man, I was so mad. I didn't even enjoy the fact that it was my best run. It was my PR, man, my personal best run, right? And I didn't enjoy it. You know why? Because
because someone beat you.
I was first loser, right? And but yet, what I should have appreciated if that dude hadn't have been there, I'd have never run that time.
Hmm.
If he had not been there, I would have never pushed to that level.
Yeah.
Right? Now I understand that today, right? So what that guy taught me, even though I lost, I learned a valuable lesson. You can do more than your mind's letting you do.
Mm-hmm.
So support, and I give you another golf analogy, and I don't know people. So one of the important things in golf is to hit the fairway, right? Because your second shot, if you're not in the fairway, you can't put spin on the ball. So it lands on the green, you can't spin it back, you can't. And if you're not on the fairway, the ball typically jumps. So it's hard to control the ball where it's going to land and where it's going to stop. Okay. So let's say a guy hits his drive. It goes in the fairway, but man, so frustrating. It rolls right into another dude's divot.
Mm.
So you've hit a great shot. You did everything you were supposed to do. You blistered it 320 down the middle. It's in the fairway. And it rolls. And I always go, they ought to be able to pick it up and move it out of there, man. That's so unfair. But the rules say, no, and that's just life.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy of life. You can do everything right. You could have your best effort, and somebody else could get the promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, I used to say it all the time. People used to, when I travel around, and I know you've heard me say, life ain't fair.
Yeah.
And boy, them airmen to get fired up in the crowd. Well, what did I say? Well, let me tell you all the answer to that. Life ain't fair. And you better
Yeah.
figure it out because it ain't. So,
Yeah.
and that's why we do. That's why we have to trust and that's my word for rest. The spiritual aspect of rest to me is trust,
Hmm.
right? So God calls us to rest. He gives us a Sabbath. He says, keep the Sabbath holy. That means keep it for its purpose, and its purpose is to give you rest. I think it's Mark 2:27 says this. It says, he said to them, the Sabbath was what made for man and not man
Yeah.
for the Sabbath, right? So the
Mm.
religious leaders tried to make it about all these rules, your donkey falls in a ditch, you can't even get
Yeah.
out, and all of this different stuff. It's like, dude, really? And
Mm-hmm.
Jesus said, look, that ain't what the Sabbath was for. The rest, Sabbath, is for you because you need rest.
Mm.
And from a spiritual perspective, you need rest in the sense of physical rest, yes, but you need to rest. Trust in the Lord your God, right? I was talking
Mm-hmm.
to a guy the other day, and he's telling me about his business and all this stuff. And he's been working 7 days a week. And he said, man, you got to get it while you can because you don't know when it's going to run out later. And I didn't say this. I wished I would. And after prepping for this talk, I'm going back to talk to him. And I thought to myself, man, how much that's such distrust in the.
Mm.
If you think that you have to work 7 days a week because the work's there now and it might not be there later. What you're saying is, God, I got to get all I can get now because I can't trust you to provide for me later.
Yeah.
Now, I know he probably didn't hear that. He wasn't that, right? But that is really what we say. We say we can't take a day off. We can't take a day and honor God and worship God and enjoy rest because we got to make it ourselves, right?
Mm.
We got to make this happen, right? Which is terrible. That's such a slap in the face to God. Now, listen to me. Before somebody starts, sending us info, I understand sometimes people have to work on Saturday, Sunday, whatever you consider your Sabbath.
Hmm.
Understand there's emergency management, and I understand emergencies come up. I got a brother
Yeah.
that does HVAC stuff. If a elderly couple in middle Georgia doesn't have HVAC and it's 99 degrees Sunday morning, he's going to love his neighbor, right? So
Yep. Yep.
get that, but that shouldn't be the routine and norm. We should be resting and trusting in the Lord.
Yeah. No, that's good. And that, I think, coming back to one of the points I made at the intro, but it's, it's about the heart. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a important component of, like, yeah, I mean, and there are times that I am really, well, right now I'm in the process of really trying to honor the idea of the Sabbath. Sometimes my wife and I are like, well, Saturday is the day because Sunday we've got other stuff going on. So let's take a Saturday and just relax. Like, maybe knock out, I don't know, even maybe small stuff around the house or something. I love football season, by the way, because it gives me a good excuse to sit on the couch and
Yeah.
just watch football.
Yeah.
But during football season, especially, it's a kind of like, okay, well, Georgia plays at this time, so I schedule my day around that. And I mean, I love my wife for a lot of reasons, but one of them being, by and large, she's usually pretty understanding of that. And I think part of it is because she recognizes, like, you need to just relax and rest. Now, granted, the last couple seasons for the most part have been a lot more relaxing to watch them play than years past.
No doubt. Go dogs. Yep. Here we go. Yeah, it's good. But so you bring that up. So, I want you to shoot straight with me, which you usually do. Off the camera, we do a whole lot more. Just
Yeah.
so y'all know, Michael wears me off. He wears me out off the camera. So he's like, "That's not true, man. You stop." But anyways, I'm a. I don't know. Yes, occasionally I will literally relax, right? And I watch some TV. But I like this. There's a such thing called, when it comes physical, active rest, right?
Mm.
And for me, a lot of times, again, fishing is an active rest thing for me. Golf's an active rest thing because it takes my mind off of things that require a lot of energy, right? Maybe,
Hmm.
maybe that's why my golf score ain't so good, because I don't use a lot of energy there. But it's relaxing. I can tell if I like going for a run or going for a walk. There's certain things, and I guess you have to ask yourself: does it recharge me, or does it deplete me? Is it energizing me, or is it taking energy away from me? I guess is a good question to ask. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of goodness in active rest, and I would probably come back to what we've just talked about. Like, okay, so if you say fishing is active rest for you, or golf, um, are you able to do those activities without getting frustrated? Without getting frustrated because, well, I only caught 10 bass today instead of 20 yesterday, or I shot a 92 instead of a low 80s. And I think probably that's maybe the more important component of active rest is, can you go play a round of golf and just truly enjoy it, man? Just like, beautiful day, which those days in Georgia are slim when it's not super hot and humid. But right now the weather here in the Midwest is just, in Iowa, is just great.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, can you get out there, man, and just play around a golf and just enjoy it, man? Just thank God for the day and the weather and your health. And if so, it's like, yeah, I think that would be a great way to rest and recharge. But if it's frustrating and intense and you're, oh, I should have done this, and man, I screwed that up, then it's like, well, yeah, that may not be as recharging and resting and kind of filling your soul as you think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's good. Mm-hmm.
I mean, because for me, running for the most part it's not rest, I guess, but I enjoy really just especially when I run at a slower pace, just kind of getting out there. And again, in the mornings when it's cool out and the sun's coming up, like, man, I love it. And so I wouldn't say running for me is active rest, but if I'm just plodding along, I enjoy it. But maybe getting out and walking, taking a walk with the wife or the kids, like, yeah, that'd be probably an example of active rest for me that I enjoy.
Yeah.
um And then of course my Sunday afternoon nap is usually tucked in there when I'm able to do that, when we don't have stuff going on.
Yeah, isn't it funny? I always like the old somebody calls you on a Sunday after, and I'll talk to people and they all do this. Somebody calls you on that Sunday afternoon, you answer the phone, huh? And they're like, "Oh man, I'm sorry. Were you sleeping? Oh no, man, I wasn't sleeping, dude. I was." It's like, why you gotta be so defensive about taking like you lose your man card like if you take
Yeah.
a nap, man. It's so
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. So maybe here, I guess we got a little bit longer before we both got to take off. But I want to pivot here to um, something in Deuteronomy that actually has to do with the tithe, and it actually I think it ties into what we're talking about in terms of rest. But in Deuteronomy 14, so throughout the word, there's different passages about the tithe, and my wife and I have spent time looking at that and studying it a little bit, because people have different interpretations of what the tithe is and where it should go. But we read this sometime last year, and it's Deuteronomy 14, starting in verse 22. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. But here's the concept that stuck out to me, is that it basically says you take the tithe and you either eat it, or go to the place that the Lord tells you to go and you eat it and enjoy it, or if you can't, then sell it and then take that money and basically buy what you want, eat and drink and rejoice. Right. And so I will read that one section. So 14, verse 26, Deuteronomy 14, verse 26. And it says, "And you shall spend that money for whatever your heart desires, for oxen or sheep, for wine or similar drink, for whatever your heart desires. You shall eat there before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household." And so we read that, and I'm like, man, that's interesting, because depending on whether you're listening to a ministry or a church, you're probably going to hear like the tithe goes to the church, or the tithe goes to whatever feeds you, And none of that. Again, I think there's a lot of ways that there's different passages throughout the Bible that talk about the tithe. But I read that, and I was like, my wife and I are like, that's really interesting, because it's basically saying take your money that you tithe and eat and drink and rejoice in the Lord. Um, and so I see you scratching your beard there. It looks like you're really wrestling through that. But so here's when we prayed about it, right? So here's kind of what we took away from that. Um, One, and this is gonna, I don't know, people may cringe, but so one of the things that we did, I said, okay, let's just give it a test run, right? And so we've tithed regularly and consistently since we've been married. And I will make a plug for tithing, is that, man, it's such an encouraging thing to do. And I think once you get over the hump of like, oh, I got to take this money and give it to the church or ministries or missionaries or all the above, like it's really blessed us in our marriage and our family. But we took some of our tithe and we said we're going to take our family out to eat. Um, and we decided to go to Texas Roadhouse and told our kids, like, whatever you want, get it. And then what we're going to do while we're here at dinner is just talk about this last year and talk about the things that encourage us in ways that God has blessed our family, and kind of just use that as a time to rejoice in the Lord. And I don't remember what the bill was, but it was probably under $100. Um, but it was kind of really interesting, where I was like, in a lot of ways, like this meal, in quote, like it's on God, like it's money that we would have given to the church or to ministries, but we're going to take this and eat it essentially and rejoice in the Lord. And so I don't know. That was kind of just something that was really interesting. And so I'll close here, and then I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. But so my wife had kind of said, we talked about cycles, and she said this idea of what we wrote down, or what I wrote down, was work, invest, rest, rejoice, and bless, or be blessed. I think it's both. But I think there's a cycle and a time to work and then invest, not just from like a financial standpoint, but invest in yourself and your marriage and your family and in other people from a physical, spiritual standpoint. work, invest, and then making time to rest. And I think this rejoicing part is really important, and that's what stuck out to me here in Deuteronomy 14. It's like rejoice in the Lord, and sometimes I don't do that as much as I should. Giving thanks and just rejoicing and saying, man, like God is good. And regardless of the circumstances of life and regardless of what's going on in the world, like God is good. And I'm going to rejoice in that and be thankful. And then I'm going to turn around and bless people and bless those around me. And then also be okay with being blessed, by others.
That's right.
So I'll stop there because I saw some beard scratching there, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So it's always, well, I don't know. Sometimes it's dangerous to get into a theological conversation without prior. But
Yeah.
anyway, so I would just offer on that particular scripture. I don't
Hmm.
think there's anything wrong with what you said. So whenever you look at a piece of scripture like that, you got to look at its culture, context, but most importantly, the audience. Who is the writer talking to? So the writer's talking to the nation Israel.
Hmm.
So as a nation, they brought the tithes to a place.
Hmm.
So what he's saying is, as a nation, y'all should take that and have a. So I would look at it like this. So your tithe goes into, like our church does this occasionally. So we tithe and then we'll have these big social events where we
Hmm.
rejoice and thank God for his blessing. Like we might have a steak dinner, like, hey,
Hmm.
something, above norm, if you will, a lot like you and your family just did, right? So
Hmm.
your family said, hey, look, we've been blessed with it. This money's been set aside for the Lord. We're going to use
Hmm.
it to memorialize God's faithfulness to us, right? And
Hmm.
so, so that's what he's saying to the nation. I don't think there's anything wrong with you applying it to your personal life.
Hmm.
So that's what he's saying in there in that sense. Um, in the broader context, I thought it was really interesting. I don't know. I'll get it from you after we get done, but I wrote down here. So work, invest, rest, rejoice, I think is what you said, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, which is really, really interesting because it really falls right in line. And you and I talked a little bit about this before we got on the air with Ecclesiastes. So without going through the whole book of Ecclesiastes, which is 12 chapters, basically Solomon, wisest man in the world, he's recounting what he's gone through. And what he's saying is, look, man, I've tried all of it. I've tried wine, women. He had
Money, power,
money.
wisdom.
He had it all. And what he says is like, all of it's empty. It's
Hmm.
empty upon empty. It's vanity upon vanity. Da 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 da. And but he goes on to say several times in there, like Ecclesiastes 2:24. He says this: nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor.
Mm.
This also I saw was from the hand of God. So he
Yeah.
says, listen, yes, you should work. Yes, you should invest. Yes, you should rest. But you should also enjoy what you have and stop
Yeah.
wanting so much more to the point that you're just exhausted and you don't even enjoy what you got, right?
Hmm.
We just get so caught up in the like, well, I got this, but then I want this, and then I want that, and then never satisfied. It's like, man, me and Lynn was sitting our anniversary a few weeks ago, 40-year anniversary. We were sitting there and we had just finished repairing our pool. So we're like, hey, let's go just sit by the pool. So we go out and we're sitting there. And I was like, this is crazy. Like, do you realize we were in a single wide trailer 35 years ago? Like we were in a single wide trailer. Like we couldn't even avoid a slip. We couldn't even afford a slip and slide, bro. We had to get an old painter's old
Heart.
plastic to let our kids slip on it, right? And here we are. And sometimes it's just like, but you start to think about, well, what if you had this? That's like, man, I don't need nothing, man.
Yeah.
I'm as happy. We had our grandkids, all 8 of them, for spring break over here, and our pool was down because the liner was messed up. So they couldn't get in the pool. Man, they didn't care. You know what we did? I went and bought a 20 by 40 piece of plastic, and I lined it up on top, right at the end or beginning of another slip and slide that was 10 foot that had the little ramp.
Yeah.
Man, they loved it, dude.
I saw that video of you.
Yeah, they loved
Glad you didn't break your neck.
it. A blast, man.
Yeah.
If the pool was, now they're like, we want to come to your house and slip and slide. I said, the pool's finished. We want to slip and slide.
Yeah.
No, y'all getting in that pool. I just paid a lot of money, bro. But
You'll get in that pool and you'll enjoy
yeah,
it.
you're going to like it. But it is, man. It's just like, stop
Yeah.
wanting, you know, years ago, I had an old, I was like, man, I just want a truck. And then I got a truck, but it wasn't a new truck. So then I was like, man, I'd really like to have a new truck. So then they get a new, finally you grow old enough and you realize it's just transportation, man.
Mm-hmm.
What you really want is a dependable truck.
Yeah.
And, just enjoy it. Just thank God for it. So I don't know. It's dead on, man. Just relax and enjoy life and stop worrying about the next big thing and how you got to make your big mark and you got to do all this and you got to do.
Yeah.
I've learned a long time ago, man. I've set out and made plans to do big things for God. And God said, all right, man, thanks. Right. And then I've been at an event, whatever it may be, man, and had a conversation. And I felt like God was like, that was awesome.
Mm.
You taking time to talk to that person, man, who feels like nobody cares about them, nobody loves them, nobody would show them the time of day. That's what I wanted you to do. And if you think about it, that's what Jesus did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's, I think, starting to bring this thing full circle here is, yeah, those are the people that he cared about.
Yeah.
I think about, I don't remember where in the Gospels, but he says essentially, those who are healthy don't need a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came for those who are sick.
Yeah.
And I won't go through them now, but I had also written down the Beatitudes is what I've been reading, and so Jesus just has this paradigm and this mentality that's just so different than the world. And to your point about stuff, and that's where I think that why Jesus, when he talks about the dangers and the trappings of riches and money, is that it can drive this cycle that then just becomes self-sustaining in a bad way, because if that's what you're valuing and that's what you're going after is money and wealth, and I just need the next thing and I just need the next thing. And you see it like in my own life, I have to be very cognizant of it, because yeah, you get the next thing and you're like, oh, that's sweet. Okay. Now I need this. And then once you start to acquire more stuff, well, then it takes money to sustain it and maintain it and replace it. And you get used to the standard of living. And that's where I'm at right now, as I'm winding down the tail end of my military career and starting to look at where do I feel God leading us in the next season of life. There's a reality of, hey, we make X amount of money and it's very comfortable. And so to be able to pivot to the next thing, it's like, well, what if it is a teacher, and what if it is you're making a heck of a lot less than you were before? And that's where I think I've really wrestled and been challenged in my own life. Like, you have to be very careful that you don't get tied to those things, because God may ask you to do something different. And if you've acquired all this stuff and all these possessions, then that makes it a little bit more challenging. And I think you then become in this place where you're torn, or you're like, oh, well, I got this big house and I got all these nice cars and these toys, and man, I gotta, live off of a teacher salary plus military retirement, which is still good. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's bad, but it's just, but to that point of like, yeah, just being content with what you have. And man, just really enjoying it. And if God blesses you with more, you acquire more, that's not a bad thing, but don't let that be what's your focus.
Yeah. You could leave your children, let's say I leave my children 50 acres. I don't know, I leave them $500,000, even $1 million, right? And they
Mm-hmm.
split it between the three kids. And and they'll do something with it, and it might allow them to leave a little bit of money to their kids, but really, statistically proven, it rarely lasts more than 2 or 3 generations. Rarely,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that my point is this: that the dollar won't last. It depreciates. It gets wasted over time. Whereas what you invest in people gets replenished and lasts a whole lot longer, man. Just
Yeah.
it's inevitable the impact that it has over and over again, and in multiplicity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think, the heart of the gospel is the idea of making disciples and disciples making disciples, right? And the guy, Rich Tuttle, that I'm on here with sometimes,
Yeah.
I love how he summed it up at one point. He said, really, there's three great commandments: love your God, love your neighbor, and make disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think Jesus really, when he calls them, he says, I will make you fishers of men. I'm going to train you. I'm going to teach you. And then I'm going to have you go out. Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Your sign right behind you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, I think, the essence of the gospel and what Christ is asking us to do.
Yeah. It's good.
All right, man. Well, I know we both got to get on our way. Definitely enjoyed it. It's been a little while, so thanks for making the time. I'm going to put you on the spot if you want to give us maybe a short summary here. We know we talked about a lot, but I'll see what you have in terms of a summary.
Yeah. So okay. I was looking. Let me share this with you. Ecclesiastes 9, 11, 12. It says, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor of men of skill, but time and chance happens to them all. For man also does not know his time, like fish taken in a cruel net, like birds caught in a snare. So the sons of men are snared in an evil time, when it falls suddenly upon them. The bottom line is, man, none of us know how much time we have. None of us know what God's doing and how He's working in our lives, and what's going on. So make the most of every day, and count your blessings, and use them to love your God, love others, and make disciples. That's a great way to think about that. But just understand that life in itself is extremely it's confounding, right? It doesn't make sense. I'll share with you a little bit from Adrian Rogers' sermon a few weeks ago. He said, it's over in Romans 8, I think it is, that God confuses this fallen world so that we would turn to Him for hope. So I would just encourage you, take time to rest physically, take time to rest, trust in the Lord, and enjoy the things you've been blessed with,
Yeah.
and make the most of it, man, and stop striving to have so much more. So I'd leave you with that, brother.
All right, man. Well, I look forward to our next conversation, and thanks again for the time.
You bet.